There's a specific kind of Sunday evening that I think a lot of us know. It's around 7 p.m. You haven't done anything particularly wrong. You haven't done anything catastrophic. You maybe watched some stuff, scrolled a bit, ate something decent. You're not in crisis. And yet there's this low hum underneath everything, this quiet, gnawing feeling that life is somehow passing through your hands like water and you can't figure out how to hold onto it. You open your phone, not for anything specific, just to feel like something is happening. You check the same 3 apps you checked 20 minutes ago. Nothing's changed, obviously. You already knew that, but you checked anyway because the alternative was just sitting with that feeling. And that feeling is uncomfortable in a way that's really hard to explain to people who haven't felt it. It's not depression. It's not anxiety, exactly. It's more like standing in a room and realizing you don't remember walking in. I want to talk about that feeling today, because I think it's way more common than anyone admits, and I think the reason most people feel behind in life has almost nothing to do with what they think it does. So let me tell you about something that happened to someone I know. He was 26, smart, genuinely motivated, the kind of person who read the books and watched the videos and made the plans. He had a note on his phone, one of those long, ambitious notes with his goals written out, where he wanted to be financially, the kind of person he wanted to become, even a rough sketch of what he thought his life should look like at 30. He updated that note maybe once a week, added things, reorganized it, changed the formatting, sent it to himself in email sometimes so it would feel more official. And on the outside, he looked like someone with direction. He had language for his ambitions. He could talk about discipline and habits and growth in a way that sounded coherent and real. At dinner parties, he was the guy who had things figured out. But here's the thing, 3 years passed, and the note got longer, but the life didn't change, not in the ways he'd hoped. And one evening he was sitting in almost the exact same position he'd been in at 23, same apartment, similar routine, same low-grade restlessness, and he had this moment of just honesty, where he looked at the gap between the version of himself on that note and the version of himself eating cereal at 11 p.m. and he thought, I've been preparing to live instead of actually living. And that hit him differently than any motivational video ever had. Here's what I want to say about that, and I want you to really sit with this. Feeling behind is not the same as being behind. Those are two completely different experiences that most of us have collapsed into one, and that confusion is doing a lot of damage. Feeling behind is an emotional state. It's heavily influenced by comparison, by timing expectations you probably absorbed from somewhere else, by social media, by what your parents' lives looked like at your age, by the curated trajectories of strangers you follow online. It's a feeling that gets triggered and fed by a very specific kind of modern environment. Being behind implies there's a race with a fixed course, that there's a finish line everyone's heading toward at the same speed, and some people are ahead of schedule and some people are falling behind. But the longer you look at that idea, the stranger it gets. Behind what? By whose standard? Toward which destination? Most people, if you press them on it, can't actually answer those questions. They just feel the feeling, and the feeling feels real, so they assume the race is real too. But the race isn't real. And here's where this gets interesting. Because even if you intellectually understand that, even if you nodded at that last sentence, it doesn't make the feeling go away. You can know the comparison is hollow and still feel hollow from it. You can know the timeline you're measuring yourself against was basically invented by a culture that benefits from you feeling inadequate, and you'll still lie awake at 2 a.m. doing the math on your life. Knowing something is a trap and escaping the trap are very different things, and I think a lot of us are stuck exactly there. Let's talk about why this happens, because this isn't a character flaw. This isn't you being weak or undisciplined or ungrateful. There are structural reasons why so many people, especially people in their mid-20s to late 30s, feel this specific brand of quiet desperation. The first one is what I'd call the comparison architecture of modern life. For most of human history, you compared yourself to maybe 150 people. The people in your village, your extended family, the neighbors, that was your social world, and your sense of your own progress was calibrated against it. Now you wake up every morning and within 3 minutes you've passively absorbed curated highlights from thousands of people's lives. The guy from your high school who's apparently building a company. The girl you met once at a conference who now has a book deal. The random account you followed 2 years ago that now somehow has a philosophy of life that makes yours feel incoherent. Your brain was not built for this. Your brain evolved to process social comparison at the scale of a village. What you're asking it to do now is like asking it to make sense of a fire hose. And instead of giving up and going numb, which would be the self-protective response, it tries to process all of it. It takes all those fragments of other people's success and builds a kind of composite phantom, a version of who you should be by now. And then it holds you up against that phantom and finds you lacking. every single day. That composite phantom isn't a real person, they don't exist, but the feeling of failing to measure up to them is completely real, and it shows up as this background anxiety, this sense of urgency without direction, this feeling of being behind. Now there's another layer to this, and this is where things get a little uncomfortable. Most of us, somewhere in our late teens or early 20s, got handed this implicit promise that if you did certain things, got decent grades, went to the right school or got the right experience, worked hard, stayed ambitious, life would eventually arrange itself into something that felt meaningful and sufficient, that there'd be some threshold you'd cross where the restlessness would calm down and you'd feel like you'd arrived. Nobody said this explicitly, nobody sat you down and made this promise in so many words, but it was in the air, it was in the structure of the educational system. It was in the movies, in the career advice, in the way adults talked about the future as though it were a destination rather than a process. And for a lot of us, we did those things, or at least, we tried, we followed something like the script, and then we looked up at 25 or 28 or 31 and realized the threshold we were promised doesn't exist. There's no point where the background hum of inadequacy just stops. There's no morning you wake up and think, okay, I've made it, I can stop proving myself now. It's turtles all the way down. And that discovery, that the arrival we were promised is a myth, is genuinely disorienting. Because now you're not just dealing with the ordinary challenges of building a life. You're dealing with those challenges while simultaneously grieving a future you were led to believe was guaranteed. That grief doesn't get talked about enough, the grief of realizing the map was wrong. And then there's a third thing. This one's quieter, but I think it might be the most important. A lot of us have become incredibly good at the performance of growth, without actually doing the harder work of change. We consume, God, do we consume, podcasts, books, essays, videos, courses, threads. We have enough information. That's not the problem. Most people who feel stuck in their lives don't need more information. They need less noise and more honesty. But the consumption feels like progress. It activates something. There's a real dopamine response when you encounter an idea that explains your experience or maps out a path forward. Your brain registers it as genuine progress. And so you end up in this loop where you're constantly learning about change without actually sitting with yourself long enough to change. Because sitting with yourself is genuinely uncomfortable. It means encountering the places where your behavior doesn't match your values. It means noticing the patterns you've been quietly excusing. It means doing the slower, less rewarding work of actual reflection, which has no completion animation, no follow account, no external signal that you're doing it right. Watching a video about discipline is faster and less painful than being disciplined. And we are, all of us, somewhat rational creatures who move toward what's easier when the alternative is hard. That's not a character failing. That's just how brains work under conditions of low accountability and high stimulation. The guy I mentioned earlier, the one with the note, realized at some point that the note had become its own kind of avoidance. Rewriting goals felt productive enough that it substituted for actually pursuing them. The planning created an emotional sensation similar to the sensation of progress, but it wasn't progress. It was the shadow of progress. I think a lot of us are living in the shadow of progress, and we can feel the difference, even when we don't want to admit it. So here's the reframe I want to offer, and I want you to stay with this for a minute before your brain tries to rush past it. What if feeling behind isn't a sign that you're failing? What if it's actually a sign that you care? Most people, and I mean this genuinely, most people don't feel the kind of restlessness we're talking about. They feel it briefly, then they numb it, then it goes quiet. They stop noticing the gap between who they are and who they could be, because noticing that gap is painful and the world offers approximately 10,000 ways to stop noticing every single day. The scroll, the binge, the busyness, the social performance, the constant noise. The fact that you still feel it, that it still bothers you, is not a sign that something's wrong with you. It's evidence that you haven't given up. It means some part of you is still paying attention, still measuring, still caring about the distance between where you are and where you want to be. That's not a weakness, that's actually quite rare. The question isn't how to get rid of the feeling. The question is how to use it differently. Because right now, most of us are using the feeling of being behind as a stick. We're using it to beat ourselves with, or we're using it as background anxiety that keeps us vaguely stressed but doesn't actually move us anywhere. And that's genuinely exhausting. What if instead it became a compass? Let me be specific about what that actually looks like, because I don't want to say use it as a compass and leave it floating there like a fortune cookie. The feeling of being behind usually intensifies in two scenarios. First, when you're consuming someone else's highlight reel and comparing it to your reality. Second, when you're spending time in ways that you know quietly aren't aligned with what you actually want. Both of those are information. When the comparison spiral starts, when you're looking at someone else's life and feeling that cold pull of inadequacy, that's actually worth pausing for. Not to analyze whether they really deserve their success or whether the comparison is fair, but to ask a more useful question. What specifically am I responding to here? What does this person have or represent that I actually want for myself? Because not every comparison is meaningless. Sometimes the thing you're envying is genuinely something you want. And identifying that with honesty, past the noise, past the ego, past the defensive dismissal that usually kicks in, can tell you something real about your actual values, about what matters to you when the performance drops. The comparison doesn't have to be a wound. It can be a mirror if you're willing to look at it clearly. The second scenario is harder. When you finish a day and feel that specific flatness, not tired exactly, just hollow, it's usually because the day was spent in movement without direction, busy but not meaningful, reactive rather than chosen. You were technically doing things, but none of them felt like they were yours. That feeling is uncomfortable, but it's trustworthy. Your system is telling you something. The question is whether you're willing to listen to it, or whether you're going to open an app and wait for it to go away. Here's something I've noticed about people who seem to actually move through life with some kind of forward momentum. Not the people who perform it, not the people who have the aesthetic of purpose without the substance. The ones who actually seem to be building something. They're almost never optimizing for speed. They're not trying to close the gap between themselves and their phantom as fast as possible. They're doing something quieter and harder. They're being honest about what they actually want, rather than what they think they should want, and they're making very slow, often boring, often invisible decisions that point toward that thing. They've also, somewhere along the way, made peace with the fact that their life will not look like other people's lives. Not because they've given up, because they've gotten honest about the fact that other people's paths are other people's paths. And grafting someone else's trajectory onto your life is how you end up in your 30s having accomplished things that don't feel like yours. This is harder than it sounds, because the world is very loud about what a good life is supposed to look like, and that loudness is not random, it's commercially motivated. It serves specific interests for you to feel chronically insufficient, to be always one purchase or one program or one breakthrough away from the version of yourself that finally has everything together. That feeling is a product, and you are the consumer. I don't say that to make you angry, or not only that. I say it because seeing the machine clearly changes how much power it has over you. There's something I want to say to the specific kind of person who watches videos like this. You're not the average person. I don't mean that in a cheesy, everyone is special way. I mean it structurally. The average person is not sitting somewhere voluntarily engaging with a long-form conversation about why they feel stuck. The average person numbed that feeling at 23 and hasn't looked at it since. You're here because something in you refuses to do that, because you'd rather sit with the discomfort than pretend it isn't there, because you're still asking the questions even when they're inconvenient and even when the answers are slow to come. That stubbornness, that refusal to fully numb out, is genuinely something. It's easy to overlook how meaningful it is, because it doesn't look impressive from the outside. It doesn't photograph well. Nobody gives you a round of applause for choosing to stay awake in a world that's constantly offering you sleep. But people like us, and I include myself in this fully, without pretending I'm past any of it, people like us have chosen, at least partly, to live with the friction of caring, to keep measuring, to keep asking whether the life we're building actually reflects who we are or whether we're just moving in the direction of least resistance. That's not nothing, that's actually the whole game. The shift that I think most people need, and again, this isn't advice in a list of tips way, it's more like a recalibration, is moving from comparison time to personal time. Comparison time is measured against others. It's I should be further along by now. It's someone my age has already done X, it's I'm running out of time. It's a clock that someone else set, running on someone else's schedule, measuring you against a standard that was never actually yours. Personal time is different, it's slower, it's measured against your own last version. It asks, am I more honest than I was a year ago? Am I doing things that mean something to me even when they're hard? Am I building anything, relationships, skills, understanding, habits, that I'd actually want if I stripped away the need to impress anyone? The shift from one to the other isn't a switch you flip. It's something you practice badly, repeatedly, over a long time. You'll still catch yourself in the spiral. You'll still have those Sunday evenings. But gradually, and this is the part that doesn't get said enough, gradually, the metric changes. And when the metric changes, the whole experience of your own life changes with it. Not because everything is suddenly perfect. Not because the restlessness goes away, but because you're finally racing a race that's actually yours. I want to end with something honest. We're all figuring this out. Me, you, the person who looks like they've figured it out. Everyone you're comparing yourself to is navigating some version of the same confusion. The ones who seem most certain are often the most performed. The ones who are actually growing are usually the ones who will admit, quietly, that they're still working on it. Feeling behind in life is not a diagnosis. It's not a verdict on your worth or your potential or the quality of your character. It's a signal from a part of you that still cares. And the goal isn't to silence it. The goal is to listen to it more carefully, to hear what it's actually pointing toward, rather than letting it collapse into general dread. You have more time than your anxiety tells you. You have more capacity than your fear believes. And the fact that you're still asking the questions, still willing to sit with the discomfort instead of just reaching for the next distraction, that means something real. We don't have to have it figured out, we just have to keep going in the right direction. And honestly, for people like us, I think that's exactly what we're doing. Here's the question I want to leave you with, and I genuinely want you to think about it before you answer. What's one version of success, just one, that you've been chasing purely because you absorbed it from someone else, and that you secretly don't actually want? Drop that in the comments, not as a confession, not as a way to perform self-awareness, but because I think seeing other people name it out loud might give you permission to name yours. And there's something that happens in a space like this, when people who are still paying attention find each other, that's worth more than any advice I could give. If this conversation is one you want to keep having, stick around. There's more where this came from. Not because I have all the answers, but because I'm asking the same questions you are. And for now, that's enough.